The day I was cast out of my own home, the sky seemed to crack open and unleash its fury upon me. It wasn't just rain. It was a torrential downpour that felt like the heavens themselves were weeping for the injustice unfolding below. My name is Amanda Caldwell, or at least it was. That night, as I stood drenched on the marble steps of our family mansion, clutching an old canvas bag filled with nothing but shattered dreams and damp clothes, I realized something profound. This moment wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning. It all started earlier that evening during what should have been a celebratory dinner. Freshly graduated from high school, I had dared to present my acceptance letter to Illinois Institute of Technology's machine learning program, a field I loved with every fiber of my being. Instead of pride, my father, Charles Caldwell, erupted into a fit of rage. A programmer? Amanda, this isn't a game, he bellowed, his voice shaking the chandelier above us. My mother said nothing, her icy glare cutting deeper than any words ever could. And then came Lucas, my older brother, who sneered, "You're a failure, Amanda," always chasing some childish fantasy instead of stepping up for this family. Those words stung more than I cared to admit. 3 days later, when I returned home from a coding prep class, my father blocked the doorway, holding a suitcase I hadn't even packed. "You chose this path," he spat, thrusting the bag into my hands. "Don't expect a single cent of charity from me. Not tuition, not shelter, not inheritance." Got it. I gripped the handle so tightly my knuckles turned white. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry. Fine, I thought. If they wanted me gone, I'd leave, but not without taking a piece of myself with me, my unyielding determination. As I drove away in a borrowed car that night, the storm raging around me mirrored the chaos inside my chest. The streets were eerily empty, save for one terrifying encounter near an abandoned gas station. A group of drunken men surrounded my vehicle, their laughter cruel and menacing. One of them pounded on my window, shouting slurs about how a girl like me shouldn't be out alone. My heart raced as adrenaline surged through my veins. With trembling hands, I shifted the car into reverse and sped off, narrowly escaping their grasp. That night, I learned fear, but also resilience. When I finally parked under a flickering street lamp miles away, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was plastered to my face, mascara streaked down my cheeks, and my lips quivered from the cold. But beneath the exhaustion, there was fire. They thought they'd broken me, but they'd done the opposite. In that moment, I vowed to prove them wrong, not out of spite, but because I refused to let anyone define my worth. Little did they know, their rejection would become the fuel for everything I would achieve. Chicago wasn't the warm embrace I had hoped for. It was a cold, unforgiving city that tested every ounce of my willpower. The first few weeks were a blur of survival. I rented a tiny apartment through Craigslist, a place so small the kitchen and living room were practically the same space. Rachel, my former STEM camp classmate, became my reluctant roommate, though her presence was more out of pity than friendship. She warned me early on, "This city eats people like us alive." I didn't fully understand what she meant until reality hit me like a freight train. During the day, I worked as a cashier at an electronics store near campus. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid just enough to keep me afloat, or so I thought. One afternoon, an elderly man approached the counter, his eyes narrowing when he recognized me. "Aren't you Charles Caldwell's daughter?" He sneered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "What happened?" "Family fortune run out." His words stung worse than any insult I'd endured before, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. For the first time, I felt the weight of everything I had lost. But instead of crumbling, I forced a smile and handed him his receipt. "Have a great day, sir." At night, I delivered pizzas for a local shop, navigating Chicago's labyrinthine streets on a rusty bike that barely held together. Rain or shine, snow or sleet, I pedaled through it all, clutching my phone for directions while dodging unlit intersections and reckless drivers. Then came that night, the one that would haunt me for months. A torrential downpour turned the streets into rivers, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. As I sped toward my last delivery, a car skidded across the wet pavement, slamming into my bike. I landed hard on the asphalt, my knee scraping against the ground as pain shot through my leg. The driver fled without even checking if I was okay. The accident left me unable to work for nearly a week, and with no income coming in, Panic set in. Rent was due in 3 days, and I had exactly $12.47 in my bank account. Desperation clawed at me as I stared at my old laptop, the only lifeline I had left to my dream. Selling it felt like selling a piece of my soul, but I had no choice. I listed it online, praying someone would buy it quickly. When the buyer arrived, a tech-savvy teenager who haggled me down to half the asking price, I bit my tongue and handed it over. Watching him walk away with my laptop was like watching a part of myself disappear. But quitting wasn't an option. Every night, after Rachel went to bed, I borrowed her ancient desktop computer to continue learning. Free coding courses on Coursera and Udemy became my sanctuary. I studied tirelessly, dissecting open-source code and experimenting with algorithms late into the night. Some nights, exhaustion overtook me, and I woke up slumped over the keyboard, my forehead imprinted with keys. Yet, each line of code I wrote felt like a brick laid in the foundation of something greater. Looking back now, those days weren't just about surviving. They were about proving something to myself. My father's voice still echoed in my mind. You'll fail without us. But failure wasn't an option. Not anymore. After months of grinding through sleepless nights and surviving on instant noodles, I finally created something that felt alive, StudySync. It was a simple app designed to help students manage their study schedules, but it was more than code to me. It was proof that I hadn't given up, even when the world seemed determined to break me. The first version wasn't perfect. It crashed twice during testing, and my heart sank each time. But I fixed every bug, pouring every ounce of frustration into making it better. Then, one rainy Tuesday morning, an email landed in my inbox from Garrett Thomas, CTO of SparkForge. My hands trembled as I read his words. Impressive work. We'd like to discuss potential opportunities. The interview was held in a sleek glass building downtown, where I felt painfully out of place in my second-hand blazer and scuffed shoes. Garrett greeted me with a firm handshake, but wasted no time getting to the point. We've seen your app, he said, leaning back in his chair. But talent isn't enough. Let's see how you handle pressure. He slid a sheet of paper across the table, a coding challenge. 15 minutes. Solve this. My stomach churned as I scanned the problem. It involved optimizing a sorting algorithm under specific constraints, the kind of task that could stump even seasoned developers. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if I failed? What if my dream ended here? But then I remembered the nights I spent hunched over Rachel's clunky desktop, teaching myself to code despite everything. I took a deep breath and began typing. When the timer buzzed, Garrett examined my solution closely. His lips curled into a faint smile. Not bad, he said. You're hired. Those 2 words hit me like a tidal wave. I had done it. I'd cracked open the door to a world I once thought was impossible to enter. But success never comes without its shadows. At SparkForge, I quickly became the target of Jake Harris, a senior developer who made no secret of his disdain for women in tech. She probably stole someone else's idea. I overheard him whispering to a colleague one day. His words stung, but what hurt more was the lingering doubt they planted in others' minds. Determined to prove him wrong, I worked tirelessly on a project assigned to me, a tool to streamline data analysis workflows. When Jake accused me of copying parts of the codebase, I calmly presented my GitHub commit history, showing every step of my process. Garrett called us both into his office. After reviewing the evidence, he turned to Jake and said coldly, "If you can't respect her work, maybe this isn't the right place for you." That moment changed everything. Not because I won some petty battle, but because I earned the trust of my superiors and silenced my critics. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe I belonged. 2 years after leaving SparkForge, I stood at the edge of a dream, or so I thought. Neural Wave Systems was born out of sleepless nights and relentless determination, a company specializing in intelligent data management tools. Our first product, Dataflow IQ, promised to revolutionize how small businesses handled their information. But dreams have a cruel way of testing you before they let you succeed. It happened on a Thursday night, just 3 months after our beta launch. A security flaw in Dataflow IQ caused a catastrophic data leak. Customer records exposed, private emails compromised, and trust shattered overnight. The backlash was brutal. Social media exploded with angry comments, and clients began canceling contracts en masse. Investors panicked. One by one, they withdrew their funding. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members questioning my leadership. Is this it? I whispered to myself as I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. Then came the vultures. Ethan rushed into my office the next morning, his face pale. "Amanda, we've got a problem," he said, handing me an email. It was from Victor Langston, an old acquaintance of my father's and CEO of Caldwell Tech Solutions, a rival company thriving on outdated practices but backed by deep pockets. His offer? To buy neural wave systems for a fraction of its original valuation. "They're trying to capitalize on the chaos," Ethan muttered. I clenched my fists, rage bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't just about business. It was personal. Victor had mocked me once, calling me Charles Caldwell's naive little girl during a family dinner years ago. Now he saw weakness and smelled blood. But I refused to let him win. For the next 2 weeks, I barely slept. Armed with coffee and sheer willpower, I dove headfirst into fixing the breach. Lines of code blurred together as I traced vulnerabilities, patched loopholes, and rebuilt the system from scratch. Every mistake felt like a dagger, every success a lifeline. Meanwhile, I reached out to former mentors, industry contacts, anyone who might help me secure new investments. One call stood out, a late-night conversation with Harvey Mitchell, the angel investor who believed in me when no one else did. "Prove them wrong again," he said firmly. "You've done it before." Finally, after 14 grueling days, I released a public statement addressing the issue. I admitted fault, apologized sincerely, and outlined the steps we'd taken to prevent future breaches. Then, I personally called each affected client, explaining the measures we implemented. Slowly, trust began to return. New investors emerged, drawn by our transparency and resilience. When Victor called again, his tone was smug. "Still holding on, Amanda?" I smiled coldly. "Not only are we still standing, but we're stronger than ever." That was the last time he contacted us. It was a phone call I never expected to receive. My father's voice, a mix of desperation and barely concealed pride, cracked through the line. "Amanda, we need your help. Caldwell Ventures is on the brink of collapse." For a moment, I sat frozen, gripping the edge of my desk. 7 years ago, they had cast me out like I was nothing. Now, they were begging for salvation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I flew back to Caldwell Manor the next morning, stepping into the same boardroom where my dreams had been crushed all those years ago. The air felt heavier now, thick with tension and failure. Charles Caldwell, once an imposing figure, looked frail, his hands trembling as he flipped through financial reports. My mother sat quietly beside him, her usual elegance replaced by exhaustion. And then there was Lucas, my brother, who had once called me a failure, now staring at me with thinly veiled resentment. The meeting began with my father pleading for a bailout. But I wasn't here to offer charity. I came with terms. Neural Wave Systems would acquire Caldwell Ventures for $25 million, a fraction of its former value, but still more than it deserved in its current state. In exchange, my father would serve as a transition advisor for 6 months before retiring permanently. My mother could either take on a senior PR advisory role or retire gracefully. As for Lucas, well, he'd start over from the bottom, working as a junior data analyst under strict supervision. Before I could finish outlining the deal, chaos erupted. Lucas slammed his fist on the table. "You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything? You're doing this out of revenge." His accusation hung in the air like smoke. I stared at him, calm but unyielding. "This isn't about revenge, Lucas. It's about survival for your company. If you don't like it, walk away." But Lucas wasn't done fighting. That evening, Ethan discovered something alarming: emails between Lucas and several major shareholders. He had been secretly urging them to block the acquisition, painting me as vindictive and incapable of leadership. When confronted during the next day's emergency session, Lucas tried to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. Standing in front of the entire board, I turned to him, my voice steady yet cutting. "Do you really hate me so much that you'd risk destroying what's left of this family legacy?" Lucas faltered, his face pale. For the first time, I saw cracks in his armor. "I did this for us," he muttered weakly. "For us?" "No, Lucas. You did this for yourself." With the betrayal exposed, negotiations resumed. My father signed the contract using the same pen he'd used 7 years earlier to reject my tuition request, a symbolic gesture I insisted on. His hand shook as he scrawled his signature, his eyes filled with shame. My mother reached across the table, placing a hand over mine. "We were wrong, Amanda," she whispered. "About everything." As the ink dried, I looked around the room, at the faces of the people who had once dismissed me. They thought I wanted revenge, but they were wrong. This wasn't about tearing them down. It was about proving that I didn't need their approval anymore. The moment the contract was signed, a silence fell over the room, thick, heavy, and suffocating. My father sat there, his hands trembling as he placed the gold-plated pen engraved with the Caldwell Ventures logo back into its leather case. For 7 years, that pen had symbolized rejection, a weapon used to sever my ties with the family. Now, it marked redemption, but not for them. It marked my triumph over every doubt, every insult, every door they slammed in my face. "You're different," my father finally said, his voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "I see it now." His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability, not the cold authority figure who had once called me a disgrace, but a man weighed down by regret. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "When you left, I thought I was protecting this company. Protecting you. But all I did was push you away." My mother reached across the table, placing her hand gently over mine. Her touch startled me. It was soft, unlike the icy disdain she had shown me years ago. "We were wrong, Amanda," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "Not just about your career choice, but about everything. About how we treated you. About how we failed to see your strength." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let their words hang in the air, raw and exposed. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They were pleading for understanding. And while part of me wanted to lash out, to make them feel the pain they had inflicted, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't what I sought. What I wanted was far greater, to prove that their rejection hadn't broken me, that I had risen above it. "I'm not here because I need your approval anymore," I said, my voice steady despite the storm swirling inside me. "I'm here because I chose to come back. Not to destroy Caldwell Ventures, but to rebuild it, to drag it out of the ashes of outdated practices and into the future." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room, from my father's weathered face to Lucas's defeated posture. Success isn't about tearing others down. It's about rising higher than anyone thought possible, even yourself. Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. Once so confident, so certain of his place in the family legacy, he now looked like a shadow of the person he used to be. "Amanda," he began hesitantly, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. For everything." I studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity behind his words. Then, I nodded slowly. "Apologies are easy, Lucas. What matters is action. Starting tomorrow, you'll begin learning what it means to earn respect instead of demanding it. You'll work under supervision, no privileges, no shortcuts. If you can't handle it, the door is open for you to leave." He swallowed hard, nodding silently. For the first time, I saw a flicker of humility in his eyes, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could change. As the meeting drew to a close, I stood up, gathering the signed documents. Before leaving, I turned back to face my parents. "You asked if I could forgive you," I said softly. "The truth is, I forgave you a long time ago, not because you deserved it, but because carrying anger only weighed me down. Forgiveness isn't about giving someone peace. It's about freeing yourself." That night, as I sat by the window of my apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, I opened my laptop and began drafting my speech for the National Tech Conference. The cursor blinked steadily, waiting for me to shape the story I wanted to tell, a story of resilience, of defiance, of turning pain into power. 7 years ago, I typed, I was Amanda Caldwell, the outcast, the dreamer, the girl dismissed as a failure. Today, I am Amanda Quinn, CEO of Neural Wave Systems. I didn't succeed because I wanted revenge. I succeeded because I refused to let anyone define my worth, not my family, not society, not even myself. I paused, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The rain-soaked nights, the sleepless hours coding at Rachel's kitchen table, the countless moments of doubt and despair, all of it had led to this. And yet, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Neural Wave Systems would keep the name Caldwell, not as a reminder of what had been, but as a testament to how far I had come. I wouldn't erase it, because doing so would imply that their judgment still mattered. It didn't. I had surpassed everything they ever tried to impose on me. This is just the first chapter, I wrote, smiling faintly as I imagined the audience listening to my words. A new era where innovation meets integrity, where failure becomes fuel for success, and where dreams, no matter how impossible they seem, can rewrite the rules of reality. Closing my laptop, I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the glittering skyline. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight, the start of a brand new day. Standing on the balcony of my apartment that night, I stared out at the Chicago skyline, a city that had once rejected me but now stood as a testament to my resilience. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared. They had simply transformed into something stronger. My journey wasn't just about success. It was about survival, about proving that pain could be reshaped into power. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for them. It wasn't about giving Charles Caldwell or Evelyn peace. It was about freeing myself from the chains of anger and resentment that had weighed me down for years. When my father signed that contract with the same pen he used to reject my dreams, it wasn't about revenge, it was closure. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who called me a disgrace, but as someone trapped by his own fears. That realization didn't excuse his actions, but it allowed me to move forward without hatred poisoning my soul. Amanda Caldwell, the name once mocked, dismissed, and erased, now carried weight in boardrooms across the nation. But this wasn't about titles or money. It was about proving that failure isn't final unless you let it define you. Every sleepless night, every cruel word from Lucas, every moment I doubted myself became fuel for my fire. I didn't rebuild Caldwell Ventures because I wanted to restore their legacy. I did it because I wanted to rewrite mine. When people ask me how I managed to rise from nothing, I tell them this. Success isn't about tearing others down. It's about building yourself up, brick by brick, until you're unshakable. Pain is inevitable, but bitterness is optional. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength. And walking away doesn't mean defeat. It means choosing a path where your worth isn't dictated by anyone else's expectations. As I closed my laptop that night, one thought lingered. This is just the beginning. Not of neural wave systems, not of Amanda Quinn, but of a new era where dreams aren't crushed under tradition, where failure becomes the foundation for greatness, and where forgiveness sets you free.